Welcome to the Voice of the Victim podcast. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Rosie.
How are you doing, Rosie?
Well, we are doing this second time around, so hopefully...
Yeah, we already recorded this episode, and it turns out Rosie's microphone cord was cutting out the whole time, and you could barely hear her. It sounded like garbage. So we're trying this again. That's why this episode will be late, for sure. But I didn't want to put it out sounding like that, so...
It is very saddening.
I know. We don't really have time for this, but...
Yeah. We're going to jump right into it.
Yeah, let's do this.
Okay, so tonight we are going to talk about the Turpin family. And many of you probably already know about this case. We actually covered this case a few years ago, and it was like one of our first, right?
Yeah, it was the reason we started our podcast. I remember when the news broke, we heard about it on the news, I think, and it just impacted us so much that we wanted to talk about it. And
right.
We definitely don't recommend you go listen to our first episode because we didn't know what we were doing. But we covered it again in episode 26. But I think a lot of stuff we talked about then we'll be covering again tonight, just when we summarize the case. So, are you ready to jump into it?
Yeah. So, for the slight backstory of those who haven't heard about the Turpin family before, their house has been referred to as the House of Horrors. 13 siblings ranging in ages from 2 to 29 were treated as hostages in their own home. Their parents, Dave and Louise, were terribly abusive. They were neglected. They refused to let the children bathe more than a few times a year. Mostly they were chained to their beds, barely fed, and beaten.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned they refused to let the kids bathe, and one thing that I remember from the video, which, again, we're covering this again because some new details have come out. ABC 2020 did an entire documentary on this, talking to Jordan and Jennifer Turpin, the one who escaped, and then the oldest daughter. And anyway, they showed the shower that was in the family home, and it was full of like black mold on the floor. Like it was never used, and it just sat there.
Yeah.
To let it mold up and get disgusting.
It was disgusting. Sadistically, Dave and Louise would sometimes allow the children out for huge family trips. Most likely, we're thinking it's because they wanted photos to keep up appearances with family and friends. They would go to Disney sometimes, or even Las Vegas. There are family videos available on YouTube of a wedding vow renewal between Louise and Dave in Las Vegas. You can see the children all dressed up. They're in matching dresses with pink bows and white tights, swaying in rhythm with the Elvis music and the Elvis impersonator. You can tell that every child looks extremely small. They're in a daze. You can clearly see that something is going on here. Jennifer, the oldest Turpin sibling, recalls this day being filled with confusion. She remembers wondering why it couldn't always be like that. They'd been living in filth, not allowed to go outside, and then all of a sudden, mother and father cleaned them, washed them, put them in nice clothes, fed them, and let them out for the day. Jennifer said it was all a mask. It was all fake.
Yeah, and you had mentioned before when we recorded this that I think you were talking to your aunt about this, and she was like, why didn't they say something when they were out? And it's an easy question to ask when you aren't in that situation. I know I have no idea how it would be, how I would feel, or what I would do, but this was one of the best days of their life. And, like, it was a special experience for them because they spent most of their days chained up in bed, eating barely anything, and so they didn't want to ruin that special day. And they also grew up in that house. They didn't know everything they knew was shaped by their parents, controlled by their parents, so they didn't know that if they did tell someone what was going on, that they would actually be separated from their parents and wouldn't have to go back and face their parents after getting them in trouble.
Right.
Like they had no way of knowing how it would all work from there.
Right. Luis and Dave actually told them about Child Protective Services, but they really twisted it and made it into a terrifying thing. They told their children that if Child Protective Services came to the home, they would take all of the siblings and separate them. The siblings would never see each other again. They would be put into separate countries and put in dog cages until they were 18 and then thrown out on the streets. So, without anything to compare this to, the siblings obviously believed it. They thought
Yeah.
this was the truth.
And I mean, that's sick, twisted manipulation, because they're obviously close with their siblings. They're all going through the same thing. They all grew up together. And so to threaten being separated if they ever told anyone, that's much worse than being like, they'll take you away from us.
Right, because
'Cause-
that's what they would have preferred.
Yeah, they want to get away from their parents, but they don't want to be separated from their siblings.
Right. And like you said before, I think it's so important to remember that most of us are looking at this situation as healthy, taken care of individuals, whereas they were so mentally neglected and physically neglected. We just can't imagine what they were going through in their minds and how they would look at these days. They were probably so excited and so hopeful that this was going to be the way it was from now on.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about Dave and Louise Turpin. Again, we're using most of this information from the 2020 interview. Highly recommend that our listeners go and watch it.
Yeah.
Dave and Louise Turpin were friends who grew up together in West Virginia. Both of them were pretty nerdy kids. Louise was in the Bible club and the school choir, and Dave had the classic nerdy kid bowl haircut, which he would never leave.
Yeah, he had that till the day they were arrested.
Yeah. He also had a bit of a stutter.
One of Louise Turpin's sisters had come out and talked about how, as Louise was growing up, there was it was a close friend or family member that had been sexually abusing her, and that is something important to remember and to know. But I think in the documentary, Jordan herself said that's never an excuse. You always have a choice if you're going to perpetuate that behavior, or if you're going to break the cycle and not hurt other people. So if this is true, if that actually happened, because like you mentioned last time we recorded, it almost felt like the sister was kind of like, this is the excuse.
Right.
This is why she did it. When there's no excuse for this. Because then that's like saying, okay, because of the way these 13 kids were raised, now they have the right to go out and hurt people. No, it doesn't matter like what happened to you. It's never okay to go and perpetuate that onto someone else.
Right. Yeah, I mean, what she went through, her and her sisters, was absolutely terrible. But like you said, it's not an excuse. Moving on a little bit here, Louise and Dave got married when Louise was only 16 years old and Dave was 22 in a Pentecostal church. The couple came from very religious backgrounds, and together they had a very religious marriage. They actually told family and friends that God had personally called upon them to have as many offspring as possible.
And yet, when they did have these 13 kids, they claimed they couldn't afford to feed them properly, even though David and Louise ate really nice meals. They had Jennifer, their oldest daughter, cook their meals, prepare their meals for them, but she wasn't allowed to eat those meals. She had to go eat. What was that meal that Jordan remembered?
Ice cubes and ketchup packets.
Barely enough to even just keep you alive. Like, if they were lucky, they'd have a peanut butter sandwich.
Yeah.
But all that, and I think Rosie's going to talk about this later, but the reason they couldn't afford to feed their kids, so they claimed, is because Louise had a shopping addiction, and she was buying all this crap that they didn't need.
Mm-hmm.
And are we going to talk about that later?
Definitely.
Okay, so I won't
Yes.
go into that now, but it's just so sickening that they felt the need to have all these kids, but then once they did, they didn't take care of them. They didn't
Right.
provide for them. But did you say she was 16?
She was 16 and he was 22.
Ugh, it's just
So,
an all around sad situation
right.
because
Right
we
there.
do need to acknowledge that, it's very possible Louise was a victim herself.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why it's so important to acknowledge these things, talk about them, and get them dealt with instead of sweeping it under the rug and then keeping it inside your whole life and going on to become a person that's emotionally and mentally broken, like Louise appears to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, after having this calling from God, Louise had her first child at age 20, and this is Jennifer, whom we see in the interview with Jordan. Jennifer remembers her first memory at age 2. She says she remembers her parents fighting in the family home. Her father was choking her mother. After this situation, mother seemed to have changed. Jennifer never knew what side of her mother she was going to see. She was very unpredictable. She was abusive both physically and mentally, and at other times she seemed fine.
So that's another notable event, is David was physically abusive to Louise,
Mm-hmm.
choking her in the middle of a fight. And again, she was 6 years younger than him. So, he should have been more responsible than that.
Yeah, so at that time she would have been like 22. He would have been around 28. While they were growing up, nobody was allowed in the Turpin homes. Jennifer went into school, kindergarten, and so on, and she was made fun of throughout her whole time in school. She was very thin. She was never clean. She was obviously the odd one out. She had a bad smell that clung to her clothes. And she remembers that she was constantly made fun of, but no teacher ever stepped in to help her or ask her if she was doing okay. In 3rd grade, Jennifer was pulled from public school and homeschooled under her parents' school. Now, this is crazy to me, but Louise and Dave did have a legal homeschooling program that's registered through the government. It's called the Sandcastle Day School. Dave was registered as the principal, while Louise was the primary teacher. So this is the school that all the children would be going to. They'd never spend another day in public school again.
But, just to jump ahead again, when Jordan was on the 911 call, the first time speaking to a person outside of her household on the phone, they asked her about medication, and she didn't know what medication was.
Mm-hmm.
They asked her what her address was, and she didn't know how to give it to them, which we'll talk about later. But obviously, they weren't doing a good job of educating their kids.
No, not at all. Eventually, Dave and Louise moved the family to Rio Vista, Texas, in a rural, small country town. In 2006, the parents moved the children into a mobile home, like a trailer, behind the house. Now, this is just insane to me. I can't believe that Dave and Louise felt no shame or guilt, but they locked these kids in a trailer and went off to live in a local motel room, going on adventures around the state.
All while their kids are at home, living off of barely any food.
Right.
They're traveling around, going out to eat, enjoying themselves. And this was how it was with Louise's shopping addiction too. She would buy all these clothes and toys, maxing out their credit cards, but she wouldn't allow her daughters to wear all these dresses she was buying. They were left to wear their dirty rags that they were always in. It was just, there's such a disconnect such a it just doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why not let your daughters wear these clothes that you're buying that you can't fit in? For some reason, she's buying all these kid things, toys, little dresses, but she's not giving them to her daughters.
And sons.
And well, yeah,
Now they definitely did have money because they were going out and doing all these extravagant things. But while they were out and about, they would drop off groceries once a week, once every other week. The groceries were never enough. This is when Jennifer was in charge of her siblings. She was instructed to punish her siblings by putting them into dog kennels. Now, she carries a lot of guilt about this time in her life, but if she wasn't going to put them in the kennels, then Jennifer herself would be put into them. It's just a heartbreaking situation because you could see how emotional she is about talking about it. But she was just a child, and a child that was manipulated and brainwashed and didn't have a choice in the matter. When Louise and Dave had their fill of adventure, they decided to all live under the same roof again. They moved the family into a home in Paris, California in 2010. And this is the same home that Jordan would escape from to get help.
8 years later, by the way. So they still spent another 8 years in this house on top of. I mean, she was 16 when she got out, but her sister. Wait, was she 16?
She was 17.
17. Her sister was 29, Jennifer. So can you imagine living in this situation for 29 years and that being your entire life? Like, that's pretty much my age, and I feel like I've already lived a lot of life. Can you imagine having all that stolen from you and having to start fresh at 30, 29?
It was in this house where Louise's shopping addiction really ramped up to an alarming rate. And Ryan talked about it quite a bit. It's one of those things that it's just hard to comprehend what's going on in Louise's mind while she's buying all these things. Like, was that a sign of some mental instability? Was this another way to neglect and torture her children? Was it a cruel joke? Was there something mentally wrong inside of her thinking that she was a child? I just don't really know what to make of that. Your thoughts?
It seems like she was emotionally stunted, and I mean, getting married so young and the abuse as a child probably played a role in her, addiction to child items or attraction, I mean.
Right.
And like trying to create a new childhood for herself, maybe. But, I mean, you gotta take responsibility when you have 13 kids in your house. Your kids. And I do wonder, too, like, if David forced her into having these kids because of this so-called call from God to...
Maybe. They did seem like a happy couple, though. It's bizarre. Yeah.
A lot of abusive relationships seem like that on the outside. But, I don't know.
So within these years, they're being abused. Jordan talks about being thrown across the room. They yank out their hair. They're starving them. They're forcing the older ones to serve them. Just things I don't know. I don't even know how you make this stuff up, or how you could make up these types of punishments for your children. They're being chained to their beds for all this time. And now we're going to go forward to the early morning of January 14th, 2018. And this is when everything changed. Jordan Turpin, who was 17 years old at the time, escaped through her bedroom window and went looking for help. It was the first time she'd ever been out on her own. It was the first time she'd ever been out of the house and on the street. And Jordan was able to get a phone from her brother, who was about to throw it away. And the reason why her brother and some of the older siblings had smartphones was so that Louise and Dave could check in on them, giving them different commands of what they needed to do next, get chores done, and so forth. The phone that Jordan had was disabled or disconnected, but obviously you're still able to call 911 in emergencies.
Did you want to play
Yes.
some audio from that?
Let's play a little audio that Jordan had with the 911 dispatcher.
And this is from ABC because I think there's like an exclusive release between Turpin's and ABC.
Okay.
So we're just going to play some clips of it.
Emergency, what are you reporting?
So you can hear.
Hello. This is 911. Do you have an emergency?
I just went away from home because I live in a family of 15, okay? And we have abusing parents. Did you
She
hear that?
sounds like a kid.
How did they abuse you?
Like a little kid.
7, not
They
17.
hit us, they like to throw us across the room. They pull our hair, they yank out our hair. I have my 2 little sisters right now are chained up.
Okay, how old are you?
I'm 17.
What's your name?
Turpin.
She didn't even know like she could use the sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't know what it was. She had never been outside on her own.
Mm-hmm.
What's your address?
Okay, you gotta give me a minute. It's gonna take a while. I've never been out. I don't go out much, so I don't know anything about the streets or anything.
Does anybody at the house take any kind of medication?
Oh, I don't know what medication is.
So it's pretty clear from listening to this, like I mentioned earlier, their parents aren't educating them. They don't have any experience outside the house on how to live life.
Mm-hmm.
All these kids are starting, even after their escape, they're starting from basically a blank slate because they're behind what they should be for their age.
Right.
On top of all the trauma and the abuse and the chains.
I think it's really like eye-opening when the 911 dispatcher asks Jordan for her address. And she says this is going to take a while because what she's doing is trying to find an old scrap of envelope with the address still on it. And she's trying to read it off to the dispatcher. And when she reads off some numbers, the dispatcher says, well, that's a zip code. Do you know what street you live on? And Jordan says no. She's trying to figure it out. She's trying to read off.
Yeah, she doesn't know how to read an address.
Mm-hmm. Just very, very eye-opening. And you're able to see just how completely sheltered Jordan is from any type of normalcy. From there in the call, the 911 dispatcher will instruct Jordan to stand by a stop sign while waiting for the police officer to come and help her. Jordan remembers being terrified that her mother would notice her missing and come find her. She said she believed 100% that mother and father would kill her right then and there out in the public. Police Deputy Anthony Colaci found Jordan by the stop sign. He was expecting to pick her up and bring her home. It was probably just another runaway who needed to make things right with her parents. But when he comes and gets her, he's confused by how skittish and strange she's acting, and she asks her if she's on any medication. Just like the 911 dispatcher, Jordan doesn't know this word. So the police officer is trying to explain by using the words medicines or pills.
Well, and it shows, like, I feel like the reason the 911 operator asked her that is because she did come across as so different, so off. And the first assumption would be she's on something that's altering her state of mind.
Right.
But no, that's just the effects of the way she was raised.
Eventually, Jordan says no, she doesn't take any medications. But when she's sick, sometimes she takes Robitussin. And it's just like the innocence.
Yeah. I think she even mispronounced Robitussin.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, it's it really shows the authenticity of her and just their situation, her wanting to get out.
Right. Jordan and Deputy Colaci go on to have a conversation. She tells him that she's terrified. She's never talked to a stranger before. She's having a hard time putting together her words, but she manages to tell him that 2 of her sisters are chained up to their beds for stealing mother's food because they were hungry. The officer asks her if she has any pictures, and Jordan replies yes, and she quickly goes and finds her cell phone. On it, she shows the deputy photos of her siblings in chains. Jordan points out from the photos, those are the places that make in on them. We know now she's talking about bruises, but she didn't have the word for bruise. In the photos, they're dirty, they're starved, they're obviously in need of help, and Deputy Kalachi was shocked by what he saw and immediately went to action. He tells Jordan to sit in the back of his police car and asks her if she has any injuries. Again, Jordan isn't aware of what the word injuries mean, so he asks her if she's hurt. She says, "I'm not hurt. No, not right now." At 7:23 a.m., with backup officers, Deputy Kalachi goes up to the Turpin home and knocks on the door. Now, even though they don't need a warrant or a welfare check to go inside of this house because there's suspicion of a child being in danger, they pretend that somebody wants to check in on them and they're doing a welfare check.
And this is another reason we highly recommend going to check out the documentary, because you get to see the faces of David and Louise when they open the door, the absolute shock.
Mm-hmm.
And turns out this was right in time, because they were literally, well, you'll mention, I think, how they said, it's messy in here, we're getting ready to move tomorrow. Like, they were leaving the next day.
Right.
And like you said that, well, what did you say about the move?
That was one of the reasons why Jordan and Jennifer decided that they needed to do something now. It's because they had just gotten the update from their parents saying, hey, we're moving tomorrow and everybody's getting chained up.
Yeah, that's what I meant. So this was like their last chance to get out. And so it was really a huge act of bravery and courage from Jordan to be the one to escape, because the whole time she doesn't know if it's going to work out. She doesn't have the hindsight we have now. She the whole time was probably looking over her shoulder, terrified that her parents would be there. And actually, in the security footage from one of the neighbors across the street, one of her other sisters jumped out the window right after
Jennifer.
her. And she walked around looking for her a little bit, but she went back because she couldn't find her. And like, it just shows the terror that these kids were living under.
Yeah.
And it really, this wasn't an easy thing for Jordan to do, but she had to do it this day because
who knows what was going to happen.
Yeah, it sounded like things were going to get worse after they moved.
Right. From the time the police officers knocked on the door, it took over 2 full minutes for Louise and Dave to open. It's obvious that they were trying to hide stuff and cover things up.
Yeah, and once the police get in, they find evidence of stuff they were hiding. But I'll let you get to that.
Dave is in a trance. He can't move from the doorway. The police officers literally have to edge around him to get into the home.
Yeah, he was just like staring, leaning on the doorway, just in complete shock.
Yeah. Louise is following them around. She's talking to them constantly, trying to make excuse after excuse. And it gets so bad that a police officer has to literally tell her to go back to the living room in the kitchen area. Another officer keeps Dave in the entryway, chatting with him, trying to keep him talking and keep him from interfering. The police officers notice a terrible smell in the home. There's garbage on the floor. There's bags and mountains of unopened products, toys, clothes, games everywhere. It's obvious that there's something terribly wrong going on in this house. The police officers go into the bedrooms where they see tiny starving children sitting on their mattresses, and they try to ask them about the chains, but they're not getting very many responses. And this is when they find another bedroom behind some boxes.
Well, they saw the wrists, though, of these children, and it was clear they had been chained up for a long time because there were cuff-shaped bruises around their wrists.
Right.
So they knew the chains had been there recently.
Do you want to talk about what they found in the bedroom behind the boxes?
So where the deputy was standing, keeping, David and Louise in the kitchen, there was a stack of boxes, and behind the boxes there was another door that David and Louise were just trying to ignore, like trying to not get the police to look in there. But the deputy notices it, and he's like, "Is there something in this bedroom?" And there's two other kids that are still chained up and just completely emaciated, non-responsive. And was that the same bedroom they found the chains in the closet in?
They went back to the other bedroom with the children who were just sitting around, and they found the chains in their closet.
Okay.
They had freshly been taken off and thrown in the closet.
So that's why it took them so long to answer the door. They were trying to hide the evidence, but you can't hide bruises. Like, there's your evidence that they've been chained up, and they didn't even get to the kids in the other room. They're probably hoping they wouldn't look behind the stack of boxes.
Right. And those kids had been chained in their beds for a long period of time. We think months. The keys were found by the police officers. What looked to be like on one of those chests. I can't think. A drawer in a bedroom set. What, a cabinet or something.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Behind a bunch of bags and trash. They had to get everything out from in front of the drawer so they could open it.
Oh, the key.
Yeah.
Yeah. The key was in a drawer that was full of clothes and then
And a
junk
dresser
on top of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So all these children were taken out of the home. They were brought to the hospital for medical attention. It was recorded that one of the preteen children had the arm width of a 4-month-old infant.
4 month.
Yes. I can't even imagine what it must have been like for these siblings and for the hospital staff. These kids were chained to their beds for years, being forced to stay awake during the night and sleep during the day. And all of a sudden, they're in a hospital with bright lights and people rushing around them, poking and prodding and trying to help them. It must have been so immensely overwhelming. And some of them probably didn't even know that Jordan had a plan to escape and get help. The hospital reports also include that some of the children were unable to walk because of their malnutrition.
So, who knows if these kids would have even made it much longer if Jordan wouldn't have gotten out.
Yeah, someone in the interview did say there was no way they could survive a move like that. Jennifer and Jordan were asked in the interview what their first moments of real freedom felt like. Jennifer said that for her, she felt that freedom in the hospital. She got out of her hospital bed and started to dance. And Jordan remembers going to a park with a few of her sisters and feeling that fresh freedom, that the fresh air, the grass, being in awe of the wide open space. She even remembers saying, "This is better than heaven. What could be better than this?" Just a simple,
imagine being that
simple trip to the park.
Like, that sheltered, having such a terrible life that is like heaven to you.
Yeah,
Just being outside and getting fresh air.
Now, a lot of the details after this have been blurry, but it seemed like there was a happy ending. The children were freed. They were given medical attention. They were given so many donations. And Dave and Louise were given life sentences in Californian prisons.
Well, as happy as it can get after this. 'Cause
right.
obviously, it will be a long recovery process.
But since the Turpin siblings have gotten out of this hell their parents created for them, their lives have still been extremely difficult. Riverside District Attorney Mike Hestron, who's been helping these siblings throughout the whole ordeal, said that they are living in squalor. They live in crime-ridden neighborhoods, and there's money for their education, but they can't access it. Several of the adult Turpin siblings live in dangerous conditions with a lack of basic needs like transportation, food, clothing, and medical treatment.
It's such a failure because people have donated money for the Turpin kids, for their care, for them to just live their lives, to be able to have somewhat functioning lives after escaping from this. And where is it?
I know. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Some of the children who spent years in foster homes have had to live with accusations of child abuse within the home. One accusation led up to charges of child abuse that's being filed now. 2 older children were homeless for a time, couch surfing from home to home. Many of the children have been relocated several times in different foster care homes, and 5 children stayed in one home for 3 years where alleged abuse has taken place. One adult child, who was a minor at the time, reported one foster parent telling her that she, quote, understands now why her parents chained her up.
How are people like that allowed to foster children? Like, who would say that to a survivor? Like, were they not aware of the situation these kids came from?
Well, she mentioned the situation in her insult, so it seems like she did.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
So completely unacceptable behavior. It's really, really shocking. The Turpin siblings have received more than $600,000 of private donations that's been kept from them. County officials refuse to disclose any information about these trusts or how the money has been given out to the Turpin siblings. They also won't discuss the, quote, justifications they have for refusing some requests of financial assistance for the children.
So they claim they have justifications, but they won't disclose them?
Right.
Didn't you say one of the boys wanted to get a bike for some personal transportation?
29-year-old Joshua Turpin put in a request for a bicycle, but the public guardian that's in charge of their financial situation refused. Now, when Joshua called his attorney asking who this guardian was and what was going on, his attorney refused to tell him. Unbelievable.
So who is this attorney that is actually advocating for them?
Well, as we know, there's more than enough money from the public's generous donations. Most of these funds have gone into a trust that's controlled by a court-appointed public guardian, but not that much has been found about this guardian or what's happening with the money. The one thing that we do know about this guardian is that they failed to file the annual accounting for the trust.
Really? So that's really sketchy. They didn't file the accounting. What, did they just steal the money and use it? Because why else would they not report the accounts?
There is a name I have for some of the older Turpin siblings. I didn't...
What do you mean?
Vanessa Espinoza. I didn't get that much information about her.
It's their public guardian?
Right. But she was more than unhelpful, telling some of the older kids just to Google it when they had questions for her. She was in charge of the children's housing, healthcare, and food assistance.
Was she like appointed by the public court? Or, like, how did she become in charge of this?
She was designated. She's a designated deputy public guardian for the Turpin family's 7 adult children. So she's not the public guardian for all of them.
Huh. Well, I guess we don't have many details about this right now, so we won't talk about it.
She's obviously avoiding the media.
It seems like it.
But we're hoping to know more about her publicly soon.
Yeah. So wait till the facts come out about that. But it's just sickening that this is possible. And but I don't want to wait any longer before mentioning this. JC Dugard, who we've told her story in the past, we talked about how she founded the Jace Foundation, and she has started a fund for the Turpin children on her website, the Jace Foundation, and we'll link it below. I think it's jacefoundation.org, but we'll make sure the link's below. And if you go to her page, there's a button right on the homepage where you can donate to the Turpin children, and I trust her a heck of a lot more than the government or whatever systems have been taking care of them up to this time. Because, she can kind of relate to them. She lived through a horrible experience herself that we've talked about in the past, and she actually cares.
Right.
Like, I trust that any money we donate to their fund through her will actually get to them and go to supporting them.
Mm-hmm.
So just want to make everyone aware of that.
Yeah. And during the interview, Jordan said that she didn't have a way to get food at the moment. She had just been released, or what seems more like kicked out, from extended foster care without any warning. She had no plan for food, health care, or shelter. Since her interview, she has been able to have like a dorm apartment through her school. But what a scary feeling to all of a sudden not have anything. Everything's pulled out from underneath you.
You would think kids are rescued from this situation that there would be some kind of public support, public funded support that would take care of them, at least for a period of time, to help them get on their feet.
Right.
Even as adults. Like, it's only been 3 years. Like, she shouldn't have to be worrying about this right now. But she is on TikTok, and she was actually live when we watched this documentary.
Mm-hmm.
And she seemed well adjusted. She seemed sociable.
Yeah.
And she was interacting with the people on her stream.
Yeah.
Like, seems like she's already come a long way.
Mm-hmm.
And like we mentioned before, even though she lived through this horrible experience, she's not out there perpetuating it. She's making the best of her life. And obviously it's going to be a long road for all of them to heal.
Right.
But she seems to be doing a lot better outside of that house.
So obviously there is still so much work to be done. I mean, these siblings deserve nothing but the best. And like we said, this government has failed them. But thankfully, this 2020 interview has really opened up the story to the public. So I think it's safe to say that we'll see some positive changes in the future.
Let's hope. All right. Well, thank you, Rosie, for writing this outline and for recording this for the second time. This is a really important story to us because, like we said before, this is what started our podcast. We're just so appalled that this could have been happening behind closed doors for such a long time, even in modern times. Mm-hmm. And I hope that all the children continue to be able to heal. Again, the parents, they're sentenced to 25 years to life, so they will be eligible for parole after 25 years, I'm guessing. But
we'll see what happens.
Yeah, they'll still have to do like the parole trial thing, right? Where they have to make a case for why they should be released.
Right.
And again, there's 13 kids with 13 different sets of desires, and who knows, maybe some of them do want to see their parents again in the future. I don't know. But I just hope they all are able to heal and live the lives that they want to live as normally as possible. So that's all you can ask for. Well, Rosie, are you ready to wrap this up?
I hope for the second and final time.
All right.
We'll see.
Well, thank you so much for watching or listening.
Yes, thank you guys.
We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye, guys.